My name is Amina Ray, and I'm 24 years old. The last words my father ever said to me were, "You were a mistake. You're not even my real daughter." Then he turned his back like I never existed. That day, something inside me shattered, and something else came alive. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply smiled, because I knew something he didn't. I had already started taking back everything he ever loved. You see, for years he treated me like trash while worshiping my half-brothers, calling them his legacy and me the leftover. He stripped my name from family documents, locked my bedroom, and made me sleep in the garage. He told neighbors I was adopted, even though my DNA screamed his blood. I kept quiet, until the day I discovered a key, not just to a house, but to everything. To his secrets, his finances, and the real reason he wanted me gone. Think of the one person who broke you. Got them? Please subscribe and be part of our sisterhood of storytellers. Let's begin. This isn't just a revenge story. It's what happens when a forgotten daughter learns to build quietly, strike strategically, and destroy everything he built without lifting a finger. I didn't take his life. I took what he cherished more: his empire, his reputation, and the legacy he tried to steal from me. I was 17 the day he said it. 17, standing in the middle of the living room in my school uniform, my backpack still hanging off one shoulder, the smell of burnt toast in the air, and he just looked at me like I was a stranger who had broken into his house and said it without even blinking. "You're not my daughter. You never were." The room didn't go quiet. It went cold. My breath caught somewhere between my lungs and my throat, and for a moment I thought he was joking, but his face didn't move. There was no smirk, no rage, just a dead stare like I was a painting he no longer wanted on his wall. I had dropped my report card on the table 5 seconds earlier. Straight A's, honor roll, even an early scholarship offer from a local college. I thought he'd be proud. I thought maybe, just maybe, this would be the moment I earned his approval. Instead, he pushed the paper across the table with 2 fingers like it was garbage and told me I was nothing. "You think grades change anything?" he said. "You're not blood. You're not mine. Don't expect anything from me." Behind him, my 2 half-brothers watched. One smirked, the other looked away. They'd known, or maybe they just enjoyed watching it unfold. My mother didn't say anything. She stood in the kitchen doorway with her hands wrapped in a dish towel, her mouth slightly open, but no words came. I waited for her to correct him, to tell him he was wrong, but she just stared at me like she'd been preparing for this moment and still didn't know how to survive it. The silence that followed felt heavier than his words. It wrapped around me like rope. My knees didn't buckle, but my voice did. "Why now?" I asked. My question wasn't about biology. It was about cruelty. Why this moment? Why now, when I was finally doing something right? He shrugged, like it was math. "You were always too soft to be one of mine. I only put up with you out of respect for your mother, but I'm done pretending." Pretending. That's what it had been to him all along. An act, a performance. And I had been the understudy, never meant to take the spotlight. I picked up the report card. I folded it slowly, neatly, like it was the last thing tying me to this house. And then I walked to my room, packed what I could in a duffel bag, and told myself one thing over and over. This wasn't the end, because if he truly believed I wasn't his daughter, then he would never see me coming. And one day, he would, not as a mistake, not as a child, but as the storm he built with his own hands, and I would take everything. I didn't leave that night. I couldn't. I had nowhere to go, and deep down I still wanted to believe it was just a bad dream. I slept with my shoes on, my duffel bag beside me, every light off except the one in the hallway that flickered whenever someone walked past. I waited for my mother to come in, to explain, to whisper that it wasn't true, but the door never opened, only silence answered, thick and humming. The next morning, I heard the shredder. It was the only sound in the house. No morning news, no breakfast sizzle from the kitchen, just the low grinding of blades tearing paper. I crept to the landing, my heart pounding, and peeked down the stairs. He stood there in his robe, barefoot, feeding document after document into the machine like he was clearing out something toxic. And then I saw it, my birth certificate. He held it up to the light for a second, looked at it with disgust, then slid it into the teeth of the shredder without hesitation. The edges curled, then vanished, strip by strip. I didn't even gasp. I just stood there, frozen, watching my name disappear in pieces. That was the moment it became real. He wasn't bluffing, he wasn't just angry. He wanted me erased, not just from his life, but from existence, as if shredding a paper could unmake a person. He didn't look up. He didn't know I saw. Maybe he wouldn't have cared if he did. But I turned and walked back to my room, numb. I sat on my bed and stared at the floor, my mind racing with questions I couldn't even shape into words. If I wasn't his daughter, then why had he raised me at all? Why had he waited until now to say it? What changed? I thought about the way he used to ruffle my hair when I was younger, the way he took me fishing once and actually laughed when I caught a tire instead of a trout. Were all those moments fake, or had he truly buried his disgust under layers of forced civility until something cracked? I didn't go down for breakfast. I didn't speak, and no one came to check on me. It was as if the entire house had agreed I was no longer there. That afternoon, I left for school with my duffel bag still zipped, my mind drifting in every direction except the present. But I made a decision. If he could shred my name, I would build a new one he couldn't touch, one he'd never see coming. And if family meant loyalty, then he had forfeited that word forever. I wasn't going to cry. I was going to remember every insult, every dismissal, every silent night, because revenge doesn't always start with rage. Sometimes it starts with a girl watching her name get torn apart, one strip at a time. That evening, when I came home from school, the air inside the house felt heavy and off, like someone had argued too loud or cried too long and left the walls holding the weight. I walked through the front door without saying a word. No one greeted me. I didn't expect them to. I went straight to the kitchen, not out of hunger, but to prove I still had the right to move through this house. That's when I saw her, my mother. She stood at the sink, rinsing a dish that had already been clean for too long. Her eyes were red, the kind of red that comes not from one tear, but from hours of holding back thousands. And she was trembling. I leaned against the doorway, silent. Part of me wanted to yell. Another part wanted to ask why she didn't stop him. Why she stood there yesterday and watched the man she married call me useless. Why she let him shred the proof of my existence. But I couldn't bring myself to speak, because I didn't want more silence in return. So I waited. Her hands stopped moving, water still running. Then, quietly, she said, "He's just angry. He'll calm down." That was it. That was all she had to offer. No denial, no defense. Just a soft excuse that felt more like betrayal than comfort. I stepped further into the kitchen, pulled the fridge open, and stared at its contents just to avoid looking at her. "He shredded my birth certificate," I said flatly. She didn't respond. I watched him do it this morning, page by page. I stood on the stairs and saw the whole thing. She turned the faucet off slowly, as if that would somehow soften what had already been done. "I didn't know he would go that far," she whispered. Then she turned around and finally looked at me. Her face was older than I remembered, worn, weighed down by 1,000 unspoken things. "You have to understand, this family isn't as strong as it looks." "I'm not part of this family," I said, voice like glass. He made that clear. She took a step forward, then stopped herself. "You don't know everything, Amina." "Then tell me," I said. "Tell me why he hates me. Tell me why you let him." But she didn't. She wiped her hands on a towel and walked out of the room, leaving the air thick and still. Her silence wasn't confusion. It was choice. A decision to stay small, to keep peace by sacrificing truth. That night, I lay awake in the garage where they made me sleep, staring at the cracked ceiling above me. My bed was a thin mattress on concrete, the same place they stored broken furniture and dusty tools. But in that darkness, I made myself a vow. If she wouldn't fight for me, I'd fight for myself, and I'd win in a way none of them would see coming. 2 days after that kitchen conversation, I came home to find the door to my old bedroom wide open. The posters I had hung were gone. The books I stacked beside the window were nowhere in sight. Even the floral bed sheets I had clung to since middle school had vanished. In their place stood freshly painted walls, a new gaming setup, and my youngest half-brother grinning like he had just won something. Because he had. My room, my space, my history. I stood in the hallway for a full minute, frozen. Part of me thought it was a mistake. Maybe he had just borrowed it while his was being cleaned. but the smell of new paint and the fact that my boxes had been shoved into the garage like trash told me otherwise. I stepped into the room slowly. The floor had been vacuumed, the closet cleared, the windows scrubbed. They had erased every trace of me. He didn't even turn from his game. Dad said I could have it. You're not really using it anymore, right? I didn't answer. There was nothing to say that would change what had already happened. My mother walked past behind me, holding a laundry basket, her eyes fixed ahead like she couldn't see me. She didn't stop, didn't blink, just kept moving. I turned and followed her into the hallway. You let him give away my room? I asked, voice steady but sharp. She set the basket down slowly. It wasn't mine to stop. He pays for this house. I swallowed hard. And what am I supposed to do? Keep sleeping on a mattress beside the lawnmower? She looked at me with that same tired expression I was beginning to memorize. Just finish school. Keep your head down. It won't always be like this. But it already was. And the truth was, she had chosen her silence again. No matter what name I bore, no matter what memories lived in that room, they were his to erase, and she wasn't going to stop him. I walked back to the garage, dragging the box labeled Amina's stuff behind me. It was torn, half open, like someone had gone through it carelessly. Inside, I found my journals, some of my clothes, and a broken frame that used to hold the only photo I had of me and my father smiling. I sat on the edge of the mattress and looked around at the concrete walls, the rusted shelves, the air that smelled of old gas and forgotten things. This wasn't a room, it was a message that I didn't belong. But what they didn't know was that I was already planning my exit, quietly, methodically. They thought the garage was where I would shrink, but it was where I began to build. Because if they were going to strip me of everything, I was going to rise from exactly what they threw away. The nights in the garage were the worst. The air was always cold, the kind that clung to your skin even under a blanket. The mattress sagged in the middle, and I'd wake up with a sore back, my breath visible in the early morning light that crept through the cracked window. But worse than the cold were the sounds from inside the house. Laughter, music, plates clinking, the noise of a family gathered around a table that no longer had a seat for me. I would lie there on the concrete floor, staring at the ceiling, listening to them eat dinner without me. Every giggle from my half-brothers felt like a slap. Every laugh from my father was another reminder that he was capable of joy, just not with me. He had found happiness in removing me, and the sound of it came through the walls like poison. Sometimes I'd press my pillow over my ears, but it never worked. The laughter always found a way in. They didn't even hide it. On the third night, I crept to the back door, thinking maybe my mother had left a plate out for me. But as I reached for the handle, I heard my father's voice through the screen. She should be grateful she's got a roof at all. Most strays don't get that. Someone laughed. My mother. A short, nervous laugh, the kind you force out when you're scared to disagree. I didn't go inside. I went back to the garage and sat in the dark, letting the bitterness harden inside me. I wasn't angry the way I used to be. I was becoming something else, clear, focused. I stopped hoping they'd change, stopped wishing my mother would stand up for me. I started using that time to think, to plan. I pulled out my old laptop, the one they thought was too slow to be useful, and I started watching videos. Business tutorials, coding breakdowns, startup stories, anything I could get my hands on. While they laughed, I learned. I taught myself how to build websites, how to create digital products, how to make money without needing approval from anyone. The garage became my lab, my training ground, my battlefield. Every late-night burst of laughter from the kitchen only pushed me harder. I told myself that someday I'd build something so strong, so loud, they wouldn't be able to ignore me. Not because I wanted their recognition anymore, but because I would be the name they whispered with envy. I didn't cry anymore. I didn't ask why. I just built in silence. And every time they laughed, I imagined the day that silence would break, the day their laughter would stop, not because of anything I said, but because of everything I'd become. I was no longer the daughter in the garage. I was the storm sleeping under their roof, and they didn't even know it yet. By the end of that month, the lines in our house weren't just emotional. They were physical. My half-brothers lived like royalty. New sneakers lined their closets. Birthday gifts arrived in stacks, wrapped in glossy paper, topped with handwritten cards signed with pride. One had just gotten a brand new gaming laptop. The other was already driving his first car, gifted on a random Tuesday because he deserved it. And me? I was still eating cold leftovers from the back of the fridge, scraping off the mold when no one was looking. They flaunted what they had. My father encouraged it. He called them his boys and slapped them on the back like he was grooming the next generation of kings. Meanwhile, I tiptoed around the kitchen, hoping no one would notice when I grabbed an old granola bar for dinner. I didn't ask for anything. I stopped expecting more, because in that house, hope was a setup, and expectations were made just to be crushed. One night, I overheard my brothers laughing about how the reject in the garage probably thought she was still part of the family. The phrase burned. I didn't respond. I just waited until the house went quiet, then opened my laptop and kept learning. I worked on a small blog I had started in secret, teaching myself how to monetize affiliate links and build email lists. What began as a coping mechanism slowly became a blueprint. I read everything I could find on e-commerce and digital branding. I created logos, ran small ads, and tested product ideas. No one noticed because they never looked. They thought I was fading, but I was growing. At school, my brothers walked through the halls with confidence, bragging about the vacations they'd go on and the businesses our father would one day hand to them. Meanwhile, I saved every penny from tutoring and side jobs, stacking it in a secret account they didn't know existed. I didn't care about the clothes, the car, or the recognition anymore. I cared about independence. I cared about freedom. My mother would occasionally knock on the garage door late at night, offering half-hearted gestures, a blanket, a piece of bread, sometimes a look of guilt that vanished before it ever turned into words. I never turned her away, but I stopped waiting for her to fight. Her silence had already cost me too much. I took that pain and built with it. I stopped thinking of myself as a victim. I was a creator now, quiet, relentless, strategic. They could keep their shiny toys and hollow praise. I didn't want their scraps. I wanted everything they thought I could never have. And I was learning exactly how to take it, not with rage, but with results. Because someday soon, I wouldn't just have more. I would have everything they valued most. And they would realize too late that the girl in the garage was never weak. She was watching, and she was waiting. I was in the school library the first time I heard the rumor. A girl from my math class leaned across the table and whispered, "Is it true your dad adopted you from somewhere?" I blinked, stunned for a second, unsure whether to laugh or walk away. "What?" I asked. She shrugged. "Your brothers said you're not really part of the family, that you were just taken in or something. That's why your last name's different." Except it wasn't. I had the same last name. Same birth certificate, until he shredded it. But clearly, he wasn't finished rewriting history. He hadn't just erased me at home. He was erasing me publicly, turning whispers into his version of the truth. At first, I thought maybe my brothers were just playing around, repeating something they didn't understand. But I was wrong. It wasn't a joke. It was a strategy. And it came straight from him. A week later, during a parent-teacher conference, my English teacher asked if I needed any support transitioning into my new family environment. I remember blinking at her, confused. She thought I was a foster child. That's when it clicked. My father hadn't just told lies. He had built an entire story, one where I didn't belong, where I was never really part of the picture. It was easier for him that way. If I wasn't his blood, then pushing me out wasn't cruelty. It was correction. That night, I confronted my mother again. I stood in the kitchen while she peeled carrots like we were in some peaceful home and asked, "Did he tell people I was adopted?" She paused. Not for long, just long enough for me to know the answer before she spoke. "He said it's cleaner that way. People won't ask questions." "But it's a lie," I said. "I'm his daughter. I know that," she said softly, her eyes still fixed on the blade in her hand. But lies are easier for him to manage than shame. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I walked back to the garage and sat down on my mattress like it was a throne. I stared at the ceiling and thought about what it meant to be erased so thoroughly that even your identity became fiction. But I didn't cry, not anymore. Instead, I logged into the small digital store I'd started from scratch. It was nothing big yet, just handmade jewelry and custom digital prints. But that week, I made my first $200. That money felt like oxygen, like a door creaking open. I didn't need their name. I didn't need their approval. I had my own. They were rewriting who I was. But while they lied, I built. And one day, the truth wouldn't just resurface. It would swallow every lie they told. because the daughter he denied was still his, whether he liked it or not, and soon the world would know exactly who I was. By the time my small online store began generating steady orders, I stopped measuring my worth by the number of words spoken to me in the house. I'd trained myself to move through the days like a shadow, unseen, unheard, but always watching. One night, after packaging a batch of bracelets and updating my site from the corner of the garage, I went back inside to refill my water. The kitchen was dark, but the light from the study was still on. I heard voices, my father's, low and confident, then my oldest half-brother's, deeper now, filled with something smug. I moved quietly, staying just outside the doorway, hidden in the sliver between shadow and hallway. I wasn't eavesdropping for gossip. I didn't expect anything useful, but what I heard changed everything. "She doesn't know anything," my father said. "I've got the assets protected. Even if she tries to pull some stunt, the trust is sealed. Everything passes to you and your brother." My half-brother laughed. "So we're really cutting her out for good?" "She was never supposed to be in it. Not from the beginning. I just kept her around to avoid trouble while your mother figured out what to do with her. But it's handled now. Once the business is handed over next quarter, you boys will take over everything. She'll be long gone by then." Something in me split, not just because of what he said, but how casually he said it. Like my entire life was some temporary inconvenience he had finally outgrown. I wanted to step into the room and scream, throw something, force him to look at me and admit what he was doing. But I didn't. I backed away. I walked back to the garage like a ghost, my pulse thudding in my ears. That night, I didn't sleep. I researched. I opened old folders. I went back through emails, bank statements I'd found in the trash, records he thought were hidden. Piece by piece, I put together the paper trail he had left behind. And what I found wasn't just confirmation. It was opportunity. He thought he'd hidden everything. He thought the trust was impenetrable. But he had underestimated the girl sleeping beside the lawnmower. He didn't know I'd been teaching myself more than just product marketing. I'd learned how to read contracts, how to trace shell businesses, how to identify silent partners and track misfiled records. What he thought was a fortress was filled with cracks, and I wasn't going to attack out of anger. I was going to slip through those cracks and take back what he thought I'd never find. Because I wasn't just hurt anymore. I was ready. He had made his plans. Now it was time to make mine. And this time, I wouldn't be listening from the hallway. I'd be speaking from a stage he built, never realizing who would one day stand on it. The morning after I uncovered the truth, the house felt colder than usual. But maybe that was just me. I moved differently now, not timid, not scared, just quiet, steady, deliberate. I didn't slam drawers or look over my shoulder. I didn't wait for someone to stop me. I knew no one would. I packed my things from the garage with the kind of focus that only comes when you're done mourning and ready to move. Most of it fit into 2 bags, some clothes, my laptop, a hard drive filled with everything I had built in silence, and a small black envelope I had hidden away for months. That envelope was the secret. Inside it were copies of financial records I'd taken from the trash, scans of handwritten notes I found in the margins of his business ledger, and a flash drive of voice recordings. The recordings were mine, of the night I stood outside the study, capturing every word he said about cutting me out, about using my mother, about handing everything to his sons. I hadn't planned to use them at first. I just needed proof. But now, they were leverage. I didn't leave a note. I didn't say goodbye. I just walked out while they were all still asleep, the sound of soft snoring echoing from behind closed doors. No one followed. No one noticed. That's what happens when they convince themselves you're nothing. They don't realize they're losing you until you've already gone. I moved into a friend's spare room across town, someone from school who had watched the way I moved through life and offered a safe place without questions. From there, I took everything I'd built, my store, my savings, my skills, and scaled them. I launched a brand. Not just jewelry now, but digital content, guides, resources. I used the very image they tried to erase and turned it into a symbol. The girl in the garage became the face of a brand that stood for resilience and quiet rebellion. Orders doubled in 2 weeks, then tripled. I reinvested every cent. By the end of the month, I had a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, a corporate one who specialized in asset tracing and contested trusts. I handed him the envelope and watched his eyes widen as he sifted through the files. "You've done half the work already," he said, almost impressed. "This isn't just revenge. This is strategy." Exactly. My father still thought he controlled the narrative, still thought I was out there somewhere, drifting, forgotten. But the truth was, I was building an empire on the ashes of everything he buried, and soon I would return, not to beg, not to prove anything, but to show him the one thing he feared most, that I was never the mistake. I was the mirror, and when he saw what I had become, he'd finally have to look at himself. 3 months after I left, I saw my father again, not in person, but on the evening news. I was sitting on the edge of my friend's worn-out couch, laptop on my knees, tracking shipments for a product launch, when her voice cut through the quiet. "Isn't that your dad?" I turned to the television, and there he was, standing at a podium in a crisp gray suit, microphones clustered in front of him, flanked by my half-brothers who looked more nervous than proud. His hands trembled as he held the paper he was reading. His voice cracked halfway through. He was crying. The ticker at the bottom of the screen said it all. "Family business under fire. Tax evasion allegations surface." I froze, my heart thudding in a slow, heavy rhythm. The empire he had worshipped, the reputation he had traded me for, was crumbling, and he knew it. The camera zoomed in slightly as he wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. I watched the same man who once looked me in the face and called me useless now, struggling to speak in complete sentences. He wasn't crying for me. He was crying for himself. The investigation had started quietly, but I knew where the thread had been pulled. The documents I'd given the lawyer had opened a door that couldn't be closed. Every shady deal, every untaxed asset, every paper he tried to bury under my brothers' names, it was all unraveling. My lawyer had filed the right requests. The recordings I captured from the hallway, paired with the financial records, painted a picture the state couldn't ignore. And now, there he was, exposed, vulnerable, shaking beneath the weight of everything he'd built on lies. I should have felt triumph. I should have celebrated, but I didn't. I just sat there and watched, not with joy, not even with pity, just quiet knowing. This was the part of the story he never saw coming, the part where the daughter he discarded became the storm he couldn't dodge. The camera cut to a journalist asking him about internal family disputes and whether he had intentionally removed his daughter from the trust. His jaw tightened. He didn't answer, just looked down at the podium and blinked away more tears. My friend looked at me, speechless. "Amina," she whispered, "you did this." But I hadn't destroyed him. He had destroyed himself. I just stopped getting in the way. I closed my laptop and walked to the window. Outside, the city moved on like nothing had changed, but everything had. The girl in the garage was gone. The silence had turned into strategy, and the first crack in his legacy was now a headline. He once said I wasn't his daughter, but there I was, the only one strong enough to bring him to his knees, and I did it without ever stepping foot back in that house. After the press conference aired, the internet did what it always does. It dug deeper. News articles began surfacing with headlines that questioned not only the business practices, but the sudden disappearance of my name from public family records. Blogs speculated, forums filled with whispers, and then the real story broke. The trust, the one my father told my half-brothers would be theirs and theirs alone. The one he said I had no place in. Turns out, it wasn't as secure as he believed. What he hadn't expected was that years ago, before the resentment hardened fully, before he started denying me in public, he had signed a version of the trust that included me. Back then, I was still the quiet child trying to please him, still showing him report cards and waiting for approval. That early draft had my name on it as a contingent beneficiary, not primary, not prominent, but there. Enough. And because he never officially filed the amendment that removed me, too confident, too distracted, or just too arrogant, my name remained part of the legal framework. My lawyer found it, buried in a stack of archived files during a quiet audit, a signed, witnessed, time-stamped document that carried more weight than any denial ever spoken in anger. My father had tried to scrub me from existence, but the law remembered, and so did the paper. When I got the call, I didn't react right away. My lawyer was calm, professional, but I could hear the shift in his tone. He thought he changed the paperwork, he said. But he didn't, not correctly, which means you're still a legal heir to the estate. And given the current state of investigation, the court may freeze assets until everything's sorted. He paused. Amina, they're going to have to answer for this. All of it. I sat there holding my phone, staring at the reflection of myself in the window. For so long I had fought just to feel seen. Now, I wasn't just visible. I was undeniable. Everything he had promised to his sons, everything he had sworn I would never touch, was now in question. And not because I took it by force, because he failed to remove the one name that haunted him the most. Mine. I didn't gloat. I didn't post anything. I didn't make a call. I just waited as the machine that had once ignored me began to slow under its own weight. Attorneys called attorneys. Accounts were frozen. Internal meetings turned into damage control. And my father, once so composed, so sure, was now scrambling to fix a mistake that could no longer be undone. The girl he called useless now held the key to everything he thought he'd secured: the inheritance, the company, the name. And while he tried to rewrite the story, the truth had already printed itself in ink. He forgot to erase me from the future. Now the future was coming with my signature on it. The court hadn't ruled yet, but the damage was already done. His empire was in limbo. His name, once spoken with reverence in business circles, was now linked to scandal. And through it all, I stayed silent. Not because I was scared, but because silence had become my sharpest weapon. I didn't need to scream to be heard anymore. The proof lived in headlines, in legal filings, in frozen accounts. But more importantly, the proof lived in what I had built while he wasn't looking. While my father tried to erase me from the trust, I built one of my own. Not with lawyers or loopholes, but with grit, with strategy, with the scraps he discarded. That old laptop he said was too slow. It was the engine behind my first website. The journals I used to hide under my mattress, they became the content for my blog. Even the garage he banished me to, that cold, oil-stained space, had been the birthplace of my brand's origin story. I took what he called worthless and turned it into currency, not just financial, but personal, legacy level. Orders were no longer trickling in, they were pouring. Influencers began tagging my brand. Online communities rallied behind the story I never even had to tell. People resonated with the message. They didn't just buy the products. They followed the journey. They told their own stories. And soon, I wasn't just running a business. I was leading a movement, one that existed far beyond his reach. My father had built his empire on image, reputation, control. I built mine on truth, on authenticity, on resilience. And because of that, mine couldn't be touched, not by frozen accounts, not by lawsuits, not even by him. I never used his name for promotion, never claimed association. I didn't need to. My success stood entirely separate. While his empire shrank under scrutiny, mine expanded in the shadows he helped create. My products told people they weren't alone. That rejection wasn't the end. That being cast aside wasn't a curse. It was a beginning, and people believed it, because I lived it. I got another call from my lawyer that week. The estate hearing had been delayed again, but the judge had requested full documentation of all beneficiaries, past and present. My father couldn't stall anymore. The truth of that old trust would have to be faced, and with it, so would I. But I didn't feel like the girl from the garage anymore. I didn't feel like a mistake or an afterthought. I was the consequence of his choices, and I was thriving in the very space he thought would break me. He tried to bury me in silence. I built a brand with it. He tried to strip me of identity. I made it my foundation. And now, no matter what happened next in court, he would never escape the one truth he couldn't shred. I had taken what he threw away and turned it into something eternal. The day it happened, I was sitting in the same chair I'd been using since the garage, a cheap, squeaky desk chair that I never upgraded, not because I couldn't, but because I wanted to remember where it began. The alert came in at midnight. My phone lit up with a sales notification, then another, then 50 more within 5 minutes. One of my digital products had gone viral on social media, not because I paid someone to share it, but because someone stumbled across my story and posted about it. The caption read, "She built this with what they left her with. You have no excuse." That post reached over 2 million views in 48 hours. By the end of the week, my store had outsold its entire previous quarter. A podcast invited me to speak anonymously. An online magazine published a feature titled "The Girl Who Turned a Garage into a Goldmine." They didn't name names. I hadn't asked them to. I still hadn't shared who my father was. I didn't need to. The point wasn't who rejected me, it was what I did with the rejection. The business that had started in silence, built with late nights, borrowed tools, and no applause, was now being discussed in rooms my father used to dominate. And then the real moment came. For years, his business had topped the quarterly sales reports for the industry. Every awards banquet, every conference, his company name echoed off polished walls. But not this time. This time, mine did. A small section at the bottom of the report confirmed what I already knew. My company's quarterly revenue had overtaken his, by a margin that couldn't be argued or spun or dismissed. I didn't scream, I didn't dance. I just stared at the report for a long moment, then closed my laptop and sat in silence. The silence used to hurt. Now it felt like justice. Somewhere across town, my father would see the same report. He'd know that the girl he forced into a garage had grown an empire bigger than his, that she did it without his name, without his money, without his approval, that she didn't just survive, she outbuilt him. The irony wasn't lost on me. He called me useless. He called me a mistake. And yet here I was, the one with something to pass down, the one building something people trusted, believed in, wanted to be part of. His legacy had been tied to wealth and control. Mine was tied to resilience. I looked around the room, the same space where I once cried into my knees and whispered dreams into the dark. The chair creaked as I leaned back, tired but full. Not of revenge, of arrival. He hadn't just lost the numbers. He lost the race. And the best part was, he never even saw me run. The first message came through email. It was short, formal, a line that read, "Your father has requested a private meeting regarding pending matters. Please advise availability." No name, just a lawyer's signature and a reply address. I stared at it without blinking. I didn't respond, not right away, not for days. I let the message sit there unread, just like he had let my letters and questions rot in silence all those years ago. He had ignored me when I was a child begging to be seen. Now I made him wait like I waited in the garage, in the cold, in the cracks of his attention where I never fit. The second message came from my mother. She left a voicemail, her voice brittle and careful, as if walking across broken glass. "He's not well. This has all hit him harder than we expected. He asked if you would come. He's been saying your name. Please, just consider it." I played it once. Then again. Not because I wanted to hear her beg, but because I couldn't believe he finally said my name without venom in his mouth. But the wounds weren't gone. Recognition doesn't erase abandonment. Not when it's this deep. Still, I agreed to meet. But not right away. I picked the date 2 weeks out. I chose the place. A quiet corner in a neutral cafe downtown where no one wore suits and no one bowed to last names. The morning of the meeting, I arrived 15 minutes early. I wanted to be seated when he walked in. I wanted him to feel the silence first. When he arrived, he looked smaller. Not just in weight, but in spirit. The man who once stood over me with cold judgment, now hunched like time had caught him mid-step. He walked slowly, his expression tight, like he didn't know how to hold regret properly. He saw me and stopped for a second before moving toward the table. I didn't stand. He sat across from me. We stared at each other for a moment, that familiar tension filling the space between us like fog. He opened his mouth, then closed it. He tried again. "Amina," he said finally, voice gravelly and low. "I didn't think you'd come." "I almost didn't," I replied. He nodded slowly, eyes drifting to the window before returning to mine. "I was wrong. About everything." I didn't flinch. "I know." He blinked, a flicker of something breaking behind his eyes. "I don't expect forgiveness." "Good," I said, "because I didn't come to give it. I came so you could see what survival looks like." The silence returned, but this time, it didn't belong to me. It was his. The same silence he used to control me now wrapped around him like a mirror, and in it he saw what he had created, not a broken girl, but the woman who learned to wait and to win. After the cafe meeting, the silence between me and my father lingered like smoke in the air. No clear apology, no resolution, just an unfinished conversation made of shattered glass and quiet acknowledgments. I didn't go home with him, I didn't hug him. I walked out without looking back, knowing he'd sit in that booth for a while longer, staring at the space I used to occupy in his life. I thought I was done. But then, 2 days later, my mother called again. This time, she didn't sound tired. She sounded afraid. Her voice trembled like it wanted to hold something in but couldn't anymore. "Amina," she said, "I need to see you. Alone." We met in a park near her apartment, far from the house where everything had unraveled. She wore no makeup. Her hands shook as she handed me a small envelope. I didn't open it right away. I waited for her to speak, and when she did, it felt like the floor fell from under me. "I lied to protect myself," she whispered. "Not you." She went on to explain what I had never fully understood, that years ago, when I was barely a toddler, my father had been caught in an affair. Not once, several times. And when the last one came to light, she made him choose, stay and cut ties to everything else, or leave and lose us both. He stayed, but not for me. He stayed to save face, to keep his business. And in the fallout, I became the constant reminder of what he hated most, his failure to control the life he thought he owned. "I knew what he thought of you," she said, eyes glassy. "He didn't believe you were his, even though you were. The shame wasn't yours, but I let you carry it." I stared at her, stunned. "You knew? All these years, you knew and still let him treat me like that?" Tears rolled down her cheeks. "I thought if I stayed quiet, it would stop, that eventually he'd see you for who you really were. But I was a coward. I let silence become safety." I opened the envelope. Inside was a DNA test, dated from when I was 12, a test he had requested, a test she had hidden. It confirmed what I always knew in my bones. I was his daughter, fully, undeniably, by blood, by law, by every measure he had tried to discredit. I looked at her, feeling more hollow than victorious. "You let him shred my name while holding proof in your drawer." She nodded, ashamed. "I can't undo it. I can only tell you now." I stood there, the truth burning in my hands. It didn't set me free, it just deepened the cost of everything I'd already survived. But now I knew. I wasn't the lie. I wasn't the mistake. They were, and the truth had always belonged to me. I left the park with the DNA test still in my hand, folded and warm from being clenched in my fist. My mother didn't follow me. She just stood there beneath the trees, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her, as if years of silence had finally caught up and taken the last of her posture with them. I didn't say goodbye. I couldn't. There was nothing left to say. She hadn't just hidden the truth. She'd watched me beg for scraps while knowing I was entitled to more than I was ever given. But as I walked back to my apartment, something wouldn't let me rest. If they'd kept that test from me, what else had they buried? What else had he lied about? I opened my laptop that night, pulled up every public record I could find on my father's business history, and started tracing backward. I wasn't looking for revenge anymore. I was looking for every piece of the truth they'd buried. And the further I dug, the darker it got. What I found wasn't just a man who had tried to erase a daughter. It was a man who had faked his way into status from the very beginning. He had changed the founding year of the company on multiple documents, erased an old partner's name from early tax filings, and claimed sole credit for a business that had once been built by 2 people. That missing name kept coming up, a man named Robert Day, the original co-founder. My father had told the world Robert disappeared early in the company's growth and had no stake in anything, but the truth was buried in an old court record from nearly 20 years ago. Robert hadn't disappeared. He had been pushed out, illegally. The case never made it to trial because Robert settled quietly and moved states. But what my father didn't realize was that the agreement had never been fully executed. A flaw in the filing, a signature missing from one line of the settlement. It had kept the case technically open in state records all these years, forgotten, dormant, until now. I called the courthouse clerk, verified the record, and confirmed what I feared. My father had built his empire on a stolen foundation. The lie wasn't just about me, it was about everything. The legacy he fought so hard to protect, the company he wanted to pass to his sons, the reputation he let rot me out of the family for. It was built on deception. The real damage wasn't my absence, it was his own arrogance. And suddenly, I realized the story wasn't just personal anymore. It was public. The man who told the world I wasn't his was standing on a platform he never truly owned. I had been thrown out of a house that was never honest. But now, I held the one thing that could bring all of it down. Truth, and a name he thought everyone had forgotten. 2 days after I uncovered the truth about Robert Day, my phone lit up with a name I hadn't saved but could never forget. Dad. That's how it still appeared on my screen, like some cruel echo of a time when I was still holding out hope. I stared at it as it rang, steady and insistent, but I didn't move. I didn't pick up. Not because I wanted to hurt him, but because I finally understood what silence meant. For years, his silence had told me I was nothing. Now, mine told him everything. He called again an hour later, then again the next morning. No voicemail, no text, just the call. The man who once stepped over my duffel bag in the hallway without a glance now couldn't stand not being heard. But I had nothing left to give him. He had burned every bridge and buried every apology in cement. And now that I had the documents, the missing signature, the incomplete settlement, the co-founder he erased, I knew what he was calling about. He wasn't calling as a father. He was calling as a desperate man watching everything slip through his hands. That night, I opened my email and composed a single message. I didn't send it to him. I sent it to Robert Day. I found an address buried in an old business listing from years ago and attached every document I had uncovered. The early filings, the failed settlement, the forged date on the founding paperwork. I told him I wasn't looking for revenge. I was looking for truth. I hit send and sat there in the dark, hands trembling, not from fear, but from finality. I didn't know if Robert would respond. I didn't know if he would even care. But I had done what my father never thought I'd have the power to do. I connected the past to the present. The next day, the phone rang again. Same name, same silence from me. This time, I blocked the number. Because what do you say to a man who only found your voice once he realized you had power? The truth was, I didn't need anything from him anymore. Not his apology, not his name, not his guilt. I had built something stronger than his money and louder than his lies. I had built myself, and no amount of begging or backtracking could buy access to what he threw away. He had spent years turning his back on me. Now I turned my back on him, not out of anger, but out of peace. Let the silence speak for once. Let it echo. Let it be the final chapter he never got to control. It took 2 weeks for Robert Day to reply. His email was brief but precise. He thanked me for the documentation. He said he had always known something wasn't right with the settlement but didn't have the strength to fight at the time. He had moved on, built a quiet life far away from the empire he helped create. But now, seeing what my father had done, not just to him but to me, he said he was willing to reopen everything, not for vengeance, for closure. The next part moved fast. Legal notices were filed. News stories picked up the thread again. Headlines shifted from tax evasion to fraud, and in every article, one name kept resurfacing: mine. Not as the angry daughter, not as the outsider, but as the whistleblower, the truth teller, the storm they didn't see coming. I didn't need to speak publicly. The facts spoke for me. When the court hearing finally came, I didn't sit in the back. I sat in the front row, directly across from the man who once called me a mistake. He looked tired, smaller, not just in frame, but in presence. Like all the weight of what he had built was now crushing him from the inside. He didn't speak to me, he didn't look at me, but I could feel his regret pulsing through the space between us. The judge read through the findings, acknowledging Robert's original stake, the invalidated trust amendment, and the multiple counts of misrepresentation. My father lost ownership of the company that day, not just legally, but publicly. It was stripped from him piece by piece, in the same way he had stripped my identity, my place, my voice. And when it was over, the courtroom emptied slowly, leaving just a few of us behind. I stood to leave, and for a second, I paused. He was still sitting at the table, staring at nothing. And in that moment, I saw not the man who had tried to break me, but the boy he probably once was, desperate to prove something, terrified of being seen for who he really was. I reached into my bag and pulled out a folded envelope. Inside was a photo, the only one I ever kept. Me and him when I was 4, both smiling. I walked over, placed it on the table beside him, and said quietly, "You took everything you could from me, but I'm giving you this, because I don't need it anymore." He looked up, eyes glistening, lips parted like a question he no longer had the right to ask. I turned and walked out of the courtroom, the echo of my footsteps the only sound in the silence he created. I didn't take his life. I didn't destroy him. I just took everything he loved, by becoming everything he never believed I could be. And in the end, I gave him what he never gave me: closure. The headlines told one version: daughter of business tycoon exposes decades-old fraud. But behind every article and comment thread was something bigger. People weren't just reacting to the scandal. They were resonating with the story. Messages poured in, from daughters, sons, even former employees of his company, people who had been discarded, overlooked, silenced. They weren't celebrating my revenge. They were standing in the truth that sometimes the ones we throw away rise higher than anyone ever expects. The press called it poetic justice, but to me, it was a power reversal years in the making. He once stood on stages while I sat in the dark. He spoke my absence into microphones, and the world nodded along. Now I was the one being invited to speak, not because I had his name, but because I had reclaimed my own. I spoke at women's conferences. I built mentorship programs for kids who grew up in silence. I created what he never did: legacy with empathy. The business he once mocked has now partnered with companies bigger than his ever was. His name is a cautionary tale. Mine is a blueprint. So to every person who's been called worthless, who's been erased from the table and told they don't belong, remember this: sometimes you don't need to knock down their empire. You just need to build yours so high that the shadow falls back on them. And when they finally look up, they won't see the failure they expected. They'll see you, standing where they said you'd never be. And the silence, it won't be yours anymore. It will be theirs. This story may have ended, but the message lingers. For more raw and real moments like this, click on the left and subscribe to walk alongside more women finding their strength. Healing takes time, but it's possible.